you can have whatever you want in life if you're willing to pay the price that life demands. Beyond that, I ruthlessly eliminated everything else and I entered what Alex Hormozi calls the season of no. And essentially I just said no to pretty much everything else. And then any time left over, I would commit to family and sleeping. And that was kind of it for 3 years. And that is not glamorous, but that's the truth. That's the way it went. Over the last 3 years, I was working in investment banking within London. And at the same time, I was studying the CFA Charter. As you can imagine, that was pretty demanding. And it's safe to say the last 3 years were pretty tough. But during that time frame, I managed to continue excelling in my role while simultaneously passing all 3 levels of the CFA Charter, first time scoring in the 90th percentile at all applicable levels. So the question is, how did I do that? Well, hang around and I'll show you. So the strategy I employed consisted of 3 elements, and those were Prioritise, Organise, and Energise. Let's step through them one by one. Okay, let's start with Prioritise. So if you're going to work in investment banking and do the CFA Charter, it's going to be very difficult, and that's unsurprising. And as a result, it's going to require significant dedication and, more importantly, sacrifice. So when I started on my journey over 3 years ago, at that time I was working in a relationship management role, which was a bit more relaxed than working in IB, but I knew I was moving into one of those roles imminently. And when I did, naturally there was a big step up in my workload, the level of commitment required, etc., etc. And at that time there was a ton of other things that I was trying to do as well. So I wanted to build a social media presence of some kind. I was getting into crypto, as many people were during the hype of 2020. So all these things that I wanted to do, and in reality I simply didn't have the energy, the bandwidth, the time to do all of them together. And it was stressing me out and it was counterproductive because I wasn't achieving what I wanted to achieve. And at that time I came across Warren Buffett's 5 and 25 rule, and simply put, it involves writing 25 of your top goals, as though anyone has that many, but whatever, however many you have, write them down, circle the top 5, and then get rid of all the others. And essentially what this says is, if you're serious about achieving any of those goals, there's only sort of maximum of 5 that you can actually do. If you spread yourself too thinly, you won't achieve any of them. So for me at that time, I reflected and I thought, okay, what are my top 5? Well, work was unsurprisingly there, had to be. Then I thought, okay, what's going to help me the most over the next few years excel in my career? Well, the CFA was pretty important. I didn't come from a finance background and I really wanted to get fluent in the language of finance essentially. So I thought, okay, that's going to be number 2. Number 3 was fitness, because in reality, without energy and vitality, you're not going to achieve anything. So fitness came on there. And then number 4 was family. For me, that's very, very important. So I wasn't going to negotiate on that. And the final one was sleep. Beyond that, I ruthlessly eliminated everything else. And I entered what Alex Hormozi calls the season of no. And essentially I just said no to pretty much everything else. Now I want to emphasize, I was still able to have fun during this time, although it was relatively limited. But the point was that it was enabled by being very consistent. So I decided that I was going to pay myself first by studying first thing in the morning. So I was up at 6, I'd study, then I'd work from sort of 9 to whatever time required, and that was usually pretty late. I'd train 2 to 3 times a week, wherever I could squeeze it in, and I'd focus on full body, etc. And I'll touch on that later in the video. And then any time left over, I would commit to family and sleeping. And that was kind of it for 3 years. And that is not glamorous, but that's the truth. That's the way it went. So it leads me on to my second point, which is you need to actually find enjoyment in the grind. Like if you're gonna do IB, you're gonna do CFA, etc., you gotta actually enjoy it fundamentally, at least to some extent. Maybe not 100%, but 70, 80% of it has to be fulfilling for you, and it was for me. And I found that the process of developing and improving and so on and so forth really energized me, and it was a good substitute for the traditional sense of having fun. So generally speaking, I enjoyed the 3+ years. It was really tough, but I prioritized these things, and I came across a nice message in the book Outwitting the Devil, which brings this together, which is you can have whatever you want in life if you're willing to pay the price that life demands. And that is the point. A lot of people put the full stop after you can have whatever you want in life, but actually you can have whatever you want if you're willing to pay the price that life demands. And the price for IB plus CFA is significant sacrifice, dedication, commitment, consistency, all the rest of it. If you're willing to put that in, you can have it. But if not, it's very tough. Okay, you prioritize the CFA, what's next? Well, in order to take this to the next level, you need to get organized. Let's face it, if you're working in IB, you're going to be working 60 to 70 hours at a minimum, and sometimes more depending on deal flow. And alongside that, you're going to be studying. So the way you use your time is everything. It's so precious. You can't afford to be reactive. You've got to have a game plan. And I would think of this in 2 contexts, in work and outside of work. So in work, you need to understand that being busy is not the same as being productive. you need to protect your time and your energy. And that means managing your workload, your diary, not getting stuck in unproductive tasks, saying no to more things, and increasing your efficiency at work, either by becoming more efficient with Excel or having a dynamic to-do list or whatever it might be. The point is, become more efficient so you don't have to work through the night every night. The reality is, if you're going to study the CFA alongside IB, you're going to need to protect your mornings or your evenings, or at least some parts of the day, so you're going to need to become more efficient. Now, I'd apply the same thinking outside of work as well. You need to organize your life. You need to have a game plan. You need to know what your week is going to look like. You need to automate things wherever possible, such as groceries online. And when it comes to studying, you need to be meticulous with this. Make sure your notes are nice and clean. Use things like Notion to organize your work streams. So the central point here is that mental energy is precious and finite, and you need to make sure you're using it for the most productive use cases. You need to build a system of organization around that which helps you achieve that. Okay, you've prioritized and you've organized. How do you deliver it? Well, the truth is you need energy. Everything else is irrelevant if you don't have the capacity to deliver it. And this is where exercise and diet becomes important. Now, it's important to understand, and I guess it's obvious, you're going to be very busy, so you need to fit this in a capacity that works for you. The objective here is not to get ripped and be a bodybuilder or, eat super clean all the time. The point here is you need to find a model that works for you given how busy you are. For me, what worked was exercise-wise, 2 to 3 times a week I would hit the gym. I would focus on full body, and that way I wouldn't miss any muscle group, which is very possible otherwise because sometimes your schedule becomes erratic and you might miss a session. So at least if you do full body, you've guaranteed that you've hit all the muscle groups. And again, not optimal necessarily for getting huge, but that's not the objective here. Otherwise, I try and incorporate movement into my day as much as possible. So I have a standing desk at home and at work. So as a result, I stand for most of the day and move around. Otherwise, I stretch morning and evening for mobility to relieve aches and pains, etc. And I try and take meetings walking where possible. So the point here is this isn't optimal for bodybuilding necessarily or to be an athlete, but goes back to my first point around prioritizing. If you've chosen to work in IB and do CFA, you probably can't do those as well. So you need to find a model that works for you given your constraints. In terms of diet, I mainly focus on whole foods wherever possible, so shop around the outskirts of the supermarket, and generally I've nailed down 3 to 5 dishes for each meal, so breakfast, lunch and dinner, that I cycle through every week, and generally speaking means that most of the meals that I eat are quite healthy. And if I need to buy out at work, I will focus on buying a healthy lunch as well. So generally speaking, within the constraints, again, focus on making it as nutritious as possible. And I guess the point around exercise and diet is the Pareto principle definitely applies. So try and get things sort of 80% right. That will take care of most of it. You won't get to 100, but that's fine. Okay, that wraps it up. The 3 points were prioritize, organize, and energize. And if you take care of these, it makes doing a demanding job and studying alongside it much more manageable. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe for more content like this moving forward. Thanks, and see you in the next video.